Held at the very popular Delhi Art Gallery in New York City, the Indo-American Arts Council hosted a special interactive discussion featuring Kal Penn on his new book titled, You Can't Be Serious. Star of Harold and Kumar franchise, House and designated survivor, in You Can't Be Serious, the renowned actor recounts why he rejected the advice of his aunties and his guidance counselors, and instead of becoming a doctor, he chose the path of acting. Kal Penn in his journey confronted racism in Hollywood, became the face of Indian-American artists in the United States, met his future husband, and worked in the Obama administration and returned back to acting after serving the public. And all of that has been told in heavy details in You Can't Be Serious. We spoke with Kal Penn at the event on the essence of this book and its reach, along with the continuous efforts of the Indo-American Arts Council in bringing together empowering and inspiring authors, artists, and more. Here are some highlights from Indo-American Arts Council's Literary Festival featuring Kal Penn. With ITV Gold and with camera person Manish, and today we're joined by none other than Mr. Kal Penn, actor, producer, writer, and a person who's literally done everything you can think about in this industry. My first question to you has to be, your book, You Can't Be Serious, right? It talks about everything in your life. Sure. It talks about you being in comedies, it talks about you being in serious TV dramas, it talks about you finding the love of your life, your parents, and how he started with just $12, like all these stories. What resonates the most to you when I say, a story that like you had a hard time accepting, but you're really glad you added into the book? What would you say?
I think one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and thank you for the kind introduction, by the way, is there wasn't really a book like this when I was a kid, and when I say kid, I mean everything from high school through maybe after college. I remember the 25-year-old version of me trying to navigate a career in the arts, knowing that I had an interest in public service, and really not knowing how to do that as a young person who happens to also be Indian American. And especially in those days, I'm going to make myself sound old here. But especially in those days, there is a lot of support from the community now for artists, this wonderful gallery that we're in, the fact that there's a literary festival here in New York. It's incredible. And it didn't used to always be that way, And so I think one of the tough decisions in writing the book was to talk about some of the challenges we've faced as a community when it's come to accepting the arts or accepting what we used to call non-traditional careers. And the reason I talk about it is because I want to celebrate how far the community's come and how much love they've shown me and other artists over the years. So when you ask that question, it's not that it was difficult to write about, it was just something that I wrote about because I would have wanted the 25-year-old version of me to be able to read it, My manager, I've only had one acting manager my entire career, and I describe him in the book, in the audiobook, and this is pretty accurate, I'm told. He's like every character from the HBO show Entourage in one person. So he's like a lion, but a total sweetheart, but also just a ridiculous human being who's incredibly loyal, and I love him dearly. And the day that I left my White House job, he called and he said, you should write a book. And I said, well, no, what would I write a book about? He goes, well, you realize nobody has gone from acting to working in politics? And I was like, literally the governor of California is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that doesn't really, and then I was like, Ronald Reagan and Ben Stein, maybe they're all Republicans, but it has been done many times before. And so I didn't think about it for about 5 years, and then about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, I kind of thought, excuse me, that maybe I did have a story to tell. So I started thinking about the 25-year-old version of me, the kid who was trying to figure himself out and didn't necessarily have a book he could buy or a podcast to listen to that talked about having multiple interests in life. And then also, the last several years especially, this idea that your life can have more than one path is something we've all grown to embrace a lot. And the thing that you do to put, to pay your rent might not be the only passion that you have. And I thought, well, maybe I do have a story that I can share with people. So those are kind of the two sets of people that made me think, maybe I'll write a book. Yeah.
Was it hard to write about racism in Hollywood for you? Was it difficult to go back to, or was it something that, again, you wanted to make sure that people knew about this?
Yeah, I think similar to that last question, I think the reason that I wrote about some of the early issues with race and misogyny and things that I and many other people experienced by virtue of what we were trying to do and those barriers to entry, again, talked about them because I love what I do so much. I love being a storyteller. I love the chance to be an actor. I love that the industry that I love and work in Hollywood has changed so much in the last 15 years. That it's almost a love letter to, hey, isn't this amazing that things have moved so far? Obviously acknowledging the work that we still have left to do, but that's definitely a part of it, yeah. One of the subtexts of this book is how systems change, and how wonderful it is that systems can and do change by people who get in and kind of shake it up.
Right.
And
not fight and get feisty right away.
there are different ways of changing the system. I think you and I may differ in our approach, but we both have the same end goal.
I'm going to take your advice, Kal Penn.
The point was to celebrate that, and the point was to look at this movie that aired last night.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine even
That
pitching
happening.
it 10 years ago.
Yeah,
So that's one of the reasons it took so long, is putting all those stories together, figuring out whether anybody would actually resonate with it. 2 years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was cleaning out an old box in my closet, and I had saved so many casting notices, so many of the more like racist casting notices. And I took some pictures of them and put them on Twitter, thinking like, all right, this will be a good benchmark of whether there's a story there to tell or not. And it immediately blew up. Like BuzzFeed did a whole thing about it, and all these different kind of blogs and journalists reached out. I was like, oh, okay, so this is a thing. This is a thing of interest. That's good to know. And then the last 8 months of writing was just fact checking. So some of these early stories, especially about navigating spaces as a man of color, I wanted to call people who were from early in my career, like when I first moved to LA, who I haven't spoken to in the longest time, and not put words in their mouth, but think like, hey, you were in that audition room when, I tell a story about this movie I did called Van Wilder. Really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Ryan Reynolds was awesome. He really encouraged me to improvise.
Let's go right back into the book. I have to ask you this question. Okay. Out of all the stories that we hear about in the book, if one of the stories was taken out of context, what would sound the most ridiculous and the most funny? Out of context, yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to be able to tell it on this show, so that eliminates about half the stories. Out of context, let's see. Out of context. That's such a good question. I think it would be, there's a section where I describe, I wasn't very good at math. But when, my dad's an engineer, my mom is a chemist, and in a family like that, you kind of think, how is it possible for you to not be good at math? Yeah. And so there's a section of the book where I say, bringing home your report card, even if you got a B plus is a 87. And my parents would say, what happened to the other 13 points? And I know everybody can relate to this, but also out of context, if somebody hasn't had that experience, they might read that and go, wait, what? But a B plus is really good. I'm like, a B plus is like an Indian F, is the joke that I make in the book.